And it really goes to prove that if you don't measure something, nothing will be done about it.
And we have to make New Jersey's business climate more attractive for entrepreneurs.
We are Wonder Women. Like, look at all these women and what they've done and what they've tried. And even if they didn't succeed, they gave it a shot.
I don't think it's fair to put a $4 or $5 billion price tag on middle-class New Jerseyans.
We've got a great lifestyle here, and I don't want to see it ruined because politicians can't manage our finances properly.
Hello, I'm Lisa Allen, and we are filming from Hometown Studios in Summit. Today, I am here with Phil Murphy, a former Goldman Sachs executive, as well as a former U.S. ambassador to Germany appointed by President Obama. Most recently, in 2014, he and his wife started a nonprofit called New Start New Jersey to address and boost the struggling middle class. And notably, after last week, he is currently the only Democratic candidate running for governor in New Jersey. Thank you so much for joining me.
Hello, Lisa. Nice to be here.
Yeah, this is such a pleasure. So last week we had some big turn of events, right?
We did. Somewhat unexpectedly. A very gratifying week, a very humbling week, kind of a crazy week. I always say to our kids, you wake up on Monday morning and you look at your week ahead, and most weeks you get that week, and other weeks you get surprised. And last week was one of them, but very humbling. We were endorsed by a whole collection of county leadership, several important public sector unions. Again, very humbling. Hasn't really changed our game plan, honestly. We put one foot in front of the other. We still have to go out there and earn this. The election for governor is a long way off. The primary is not until next June. The general is not till next November. So we are still, looking at ultimately a 13-month period. So we're just sort of keeping our heads down, one foot in front of the other, as I say. Also focused on this November, in fairness. Spending a lot of time making sure, most importantly, that Hillary Clinton gets elected president. We might be able to win a congressional seat here in New Jersey in the 5th Congressional District. So spending a lot of time on that, and then a lot of down ballot races as well.
Right. So it was unconventional. You had announced a year ahead of schedule. Most people don't announce really until after November. And two powerhouses. I want to back up for a second because I want to get into why you're running. I want to talk about you being a U.S. ambassador to Germany. But the fact that last week, Mayor Fulop, who is a mayor to one of the biggest cities in New Jersey, and Senate President Sweeney, also, not only did they drop out of the race, they came out and endorsed you. And I don't want to gloss over the fact that you are the outsider.
Right.
You were not expected to really do all that well. So what is your response to that?
I'd say, first of all, we did announce our candidacy early on May 16th. We did it for a couple of reasons. One is my wife Tammy and I are the parents of 4 teenagers, and the 6 of us, this is a team sport for us. And we had come to the conclusion as our kids were saying to us, hey, Mom and Dad, we're not talking about if or whether anymore, we're talking about when. So if we're really proponents of transparency, let's get out there, and that's probably the biggest reason we announced. And secondly, practically in this state, if you're not either a sitting elected official or a declared candidate for office, there's not much you can do. You can't do polling, you can't raise money, you can't open an office. So for both the sort of higher ground reasons and the practical reasons, we announced early. Even before the events that you're referring to as it relates to Mayor Fulop and Senate President Sweeney, we were having a good run. We were the only candidate, we remain the only Democratic candidate as we sit here for governor. We had used that 21 or 22 weeks, I think, quite effectively, very much taking it to the people. I think we had knocked, at this, as we sit today, I think we've knocked on over 175,000 doors. We've done countless town halls, lots of social media, etc. So I felt like we had gotten out to a really strong start. I did not expect Mayor Fulop to back out, and I was deeply appreciative of his endorsement. I didn't see it coming, honestly. And likewise, Senate President Sweeney, appreciate what he said when he also stepped out of the race. So it's not what I expected necessarily, but it hasn't really impacted our approach, which is, again, keep taking our case to the people, doing as much listening, frankly, as possible. This is a state in deep economic crisis. So I want to not only make sure people know who I am, but I want to know who they are and what's on their minds. So we'll keep doing that.
Right. What's on their minds? Because you've done several town halls. What have you been hearing?
They are, first of all, it's a combination of Remember that movie Network from 40 years ago? The guys, I'm dating myself, I apologize. There's an actor, and he said, just open your window, lean out it, and say, I'm mad as heck, I'm not going to take it anymore. That's New Jersey right now. They've had it. They've absolutely had it. So at one level, what I'm hearing is they're sick of the same old solutions, the usual suspects. They feel like they're victims, and this is what I've come to call this, of a failed special interest political system, where it feels like there's a bubble, and inside that bubble there's a group of folks doing just fine, but they don't care about the rest of us, and we're not doing just fine. So that's one. There's a feeling of being left out, left behind. And secondly, things begin and end for me, and this is what I'm hearing from folks every single day, with the economy. If we don't get the economy right, we don't get New Jersey right. And right now the economy is both flat as a pancake, and profoundly unfair, meaning it's a zero-sum economy. When these so-called special interests do well, they do well at our expense. So we both have to grow the economy and make it fairer. And that's the case I've been making, that I'm that guy. I believe I'm the guy that can both grow it, and I talk a lot about the innovation economy and the infrastructure economy, both of which are part of our gene pool in this state, as well as making the economy fairer, whether it's through wages, benefits, college affordability, equal pay for equal work, a whole series of things. That's that economic theme, both growing and fairness, take up probably 80% of the conversations I have. Do people care about sensible gun safety laws? Yes. Putting money back in to fund women's health? Yes. Lead paint remediation? Absolutely. The environment? Absolutely. There's a whole list of things that are either directly or indirectly related to the economy that people also care about. But if we don't get that economy going and make it fairer, we can forget about a lot of the other things that we need to do.
Right. Well, and I'm glad that you bring up lead in the water, for example, because the transportation fund is broken. That is one of the biggest challenges for New Jersey, pension and health care. Under Governor Cody, you were actually on the original New Jersey Benefits Commission to try and fix the problem. So, and I say why I brought up water and lead is because that's under transportation, so that's how it's funded. So how do you start dealing with those issues first? Because if we don't, then 10 years from now, 20 years from now, this state could be,
right?
Exactly.
Well, we've had a resolution on the Transportation Trust Fund. We'll start there through the gas tax, and I don't like the fact that that was our only choice, but I've been supportive of a gas tax increase for a couple of years now. I'm not sure that I had it exactly at 23 cents, but we had to do something. The fund has become bankrupt. Started under Governor Kane, one of my an old friend and one of my mentors. He reminded me that when it started, it was 87 cents of equity from the gas tax and 13 cents of interest and debt service. It's now over 99 cents before this resolution of interest and debt service and less than a penny of equity. This will now address that, thankfully. It took too long to get there. I'd be very critical of Governor Christie for not getting us there sooner. I also wish it had been a cleaner bill. They attached a lot of things onto this, which that wouldn't have been the case. Some elements were good. The increase in the earned income tax credit, which I have been talking about, I think is a good thing. But other elements just had nothing to do with the gas tax. It was just pushing the governor's agenda, as it were, his personal agenda. Putting that aside, that's an important step to get the Transportation Trust Fund funded, get it back on its feet. That creates jobs instantly, and it means investment in long-lasting projects that our kids and grandkids will benefit from. So that part of it's good. We need to do more than that. We need to get back to dreaming and doing the big things again. Again, I think the governor's cancellation of the ARC Tunnel project will have consequences for a half a century or more in New Jersey. We've got to get the successor to that up and running, funded, and being built. Our location is one of our most cherished and most important assets as a state. We have the God-given location that 49 other states would die to have. Let's take advantage of that. Let's always be respectful of the environment, which is a challenge because we're the densest state in the nation. But I think we can do both. I think we can both take advantage of our location and respect the environment, and that's what I'm going to do if I'm elected governor, and that's what we've not done under this administration.
Well, and I want to get back to how much the 23-cent gas tax, is that really going to be enough? Because when you talk about the debt that we've incurred on the transportation. We're borrowing more. And we're not putting enough in. One, is 23 cents really going to be enough? When you look at how much we spend on repairing roads, I think it was Mike Doherty who had said that we are 12 times the national average in terms of what it costs to fix our roads. So I think that Jersey residents they're willing to put in the money, but is it going to be dedicated 100% to the roads? Is 23 cents enough? We have to make some really sweeping changes to the transportation fund to make it viable.
Amen. So is it enough? I don't think the market could bear more than 23 cents. So I hope at least it's a substantial start. Folks are rightfully, people who get in their car to go to work every day are not happy about this, and I don't blame them. We've been painted into a corner. This was the only choice that we had, which is why all these other things that got attached to me didn't address that person who gets in the car cleanly enough. I would have said, okay, what's the demographic of that person? Where can we find something to cushion the blow, recognizing we had to replenish the Transportation Trust Fund. So is it enough? I hope so. It's at least a good start. You mentioned something else though, Lisa, which is important. This state, leadership of the state, both sides of the aisle, but particularly this administration, has claimed that we're going to use money over here for Project X or Use X, and yet we found out later on that they just took the money and plugged up some other hole that they couldn't find other money to fill up. So not only, when folks hear about gas tax, not only do they not want to pay it, they're skeptical that it's actually going to go to the use that it's required to, as opposed to something else. So there's a constitutional amendment on offer that would require that. I hate to think it had to come to that. You'd think that you could just trust the legislative and executive branch process, that it would naturally, the money would go where it's being promised. If that's what it takes, then that's what it takes. Last comment. The TTF can't fulfill all of our infrastructure aspirations. It can't build the successor to the ARC tunnel, by example, which is called the Gateway Project. That has to be a big down payment by the federal government. It has to be New Jersey, New York, the Port Authority. Maybe increasingly going forward, private sector participation in public-private partnerships. Those projects are such a scale, measured 10, $15 billion, that you have to find the money from a number of different sources. And the TTF will not do that. We've got to find that money elsewhere, beginning with the federal government.
Well, and that's interesting because I don't want to get away from answering the question about pensions and healthcare, but I do want to talk about when you say we have to find the money somewhere else. You've mentioned about New Jersey should have its own first bank to fund some of these projects. Can you talk a little bit about that?
This is an idea. I run the risk of falling in love with my own ideas, but it's an idea that I really like, and I think others do as well. There's only one public bank in the country. It's in North Dakota, and it's 90 years old. So a rightful question is, why is there only one, and why is it taking 90 years for another state to stand up and say that they wanted one?
That was my next question.
Exactly. Well, it's a good one. I don't know the answer to that, actually, because I think it's an idea that fills a space and accomplishes some of our objectives quite nicely if it's done right. So the notion is the following. Right now, whether it's the state of New Jersey, the county, the local community, Board of Education, whatever it might be, they take in tax dollars, they take in fees, and they just like any of us would, they put that in a bank. It turns out most of those dollars are in what I used to call money center banks. Other folks would say, plain and simple, Wall Street banks. Those banks have significant deposits, average balances from New Jersey. One such bank last year had an average balance of $1.2 billion or $1.3 billion. So this is serious money. That bank, by the way, made exactly 3 loans through the Small Business Administration program back into New Jersey for a total of $225,000.
That's nothing.
So you don't have to be a math major to see $1.3 billion over here and $225,000 over here. So the notion would be, start a bank in New Jersey, owned by the citizens. Potentially, it's a commercial enterprise, so it's not a charitable organization. It's there to make money. Potentially pitch the bank, ownership of the bank, to our pension funds as an attractive investment, but either citizens and or pension funds. Take all those dollars that are now sitting in these big Wall Street banks and bring them on deposit back into the state. And then as we articulated the notion as to what business this bank would be in other than accepting those deposits, we touched upon 3 areas where I think it could fill a space right now that's sorely needed. One is to be a purveyor of student loans. Right now, our kids are borrowing. It costs way too much money to go to college. They have to borrow way too much money to go, and the terms are outrageous. So the notion would be student loans that are still commercial terms, but much more reasonable than the current. Secondly, small business loans, not working against community banks, but with community banks to put more capital into either starting businesses or growing businesses. I sit all the time with small businesses. I was with a group of Peruvian small business owners yesterday. They get frustrated by having to go into 17 different silos for answers. And secondly, they can't find the capital they need to start or to grow. This would address that. And then thirdly, to your question about infrastructure, that's the third piece. Not big tunnel stuff, but small scale community infrastructure needs that right now the communities at the back of the line waiting for a development authority to get to them, or they're having to go to the bond market on terms that they don't like. Again, probably working with community banks, get money into the small scale infrastructure projects a lot faster, a lot more efficiently. So that's the idea. As I say, I'm kind of falling in love with the idea, I have to admit, but I think it fills a space that is empty at the moment and that could advance a lot of our interests.
Right, and I love that idea too. My question would be would it be at risk for politicians to get their hands on? Because it seems in New Jersey, great ideas, great intentions, and then all of a sudden, it just doesn't seem to,
It's a good question.
Yeah.
And it's one that we've gotten a lot, and it's one that I'm concerned that we get right as well. It turns out, as it relates to the deposits that I referred to, nobody knows that. As I've been saying this over the past month, that we had this one bank that had $1.3 billion on balance and they made $225,000. That's completely opaque to everybody. We had to dig to find that information. So as it relates to that part of the equation, right now we can't see what's going on. This bank would shine a light actually on that dynamic. That's a good thing. And then secondly, I think you've got to charter this bank properly. The governance has to be clean as a whistle. It has to be foolproof. It has to have a thick cement barrier around it as it relates to legal and governance issues. North Dakota succeeded in achieving that independence. I'm confident we can construct this such that this can also achieve that independence. But as we've looked at the Bridgegate trial, folks rightfully suggest, well, the Port Authority is supposed to be an independent entity, and that's been littered with political favoritism and cronies.
Right.
So the question is a fair one. We have to get that part of it really right. I believe we can, and if we do, I think, as I say, it can fill a big need for us right now in the state.
Great. Okay, let's get to pensions and healthcare, because the increase in healthcare is rising faster than people's salaries. It's rising faster than the returns on any kind of investment. The pensions are upward of $200 billion in debt. I mean, no matter how you look at it, it's a minimum of $150 billion. You were on the original pension commission. We're further, I was going to say we're at the same place as when you were there, but we're actually worse off.
I wish we were.
Right. Yeah. So, and the constitutional amendment wasn't on the ballot this year. I've seen that you are a proponent of the constitutional amendment. So talk about what would you do to actually fix the problem, and what makes you a proponent of the constitutional amendment?
So this is a big one. So if you sort of look at the guerrilla issues we're facing as a state, this would be guerrilla 1 or 2. This is a biggie. As you rightfully point out, I chaired the original commission on this back in 2005 under Governor Cody, a Democrat, and I think it took a lot of courage for a Democrat to even put this commission together because the news wasn't pretty.
Right.
I'm proud of our commission and the findings and our recommendations. And there's a whole series of them, and that's something we should talk about as a separate matter. We had a whole bunch of different pieces that we recommended, but recommendation number 1 was that the state had to stand up and do its part of the bargain, hold up its part of the bargain. This is in 2005. This was, by the way, even with Democrats in office.
Right.
These problems go back to the 1990s from the Whitman administration.
Right.
So this is not, while I would argue that Chris Christie has kicked the can harder and farther down the road than anybody, he wasn't the first person to kick it.
Right.
This has been kicked down the road with horrific bad judgment decisions and lack of a spirit of owning up to one side of the bargain. And that's, by the way, how I get to the constitutional amendment support, because how could you blame public sector employees who have done what they've been asked to do, even when they didn't like what they were asked to do, even when the process wasn't fair, they did it, and yet the state said, listen, if you do your side, if we can, under Governor Christie, basically jam the stuff down your throat, you do that, and in exchange for that lack of due process and this pain you're going to take, over here we'll hold up our side. Well, they had this jam down their throat, and of course the state welches on its side. How could you blame them for asking for a constitutional amendment? It's like many things in our state, Lisa, right now. There's no, the way I think of it, there's no one signing ceremony on the deck of the aircraft carrier.
Right.
There's no one thing that can turn all of our fortunes around overnight. But there are a series of actions, while individually smaller scale than you might expect, when taken together collectively, have the cumulative impact of big steps. So as it relates to the pension question, number one, I support the amendment that requires the state to pay.
On quarterly rather than annually.
Then secondly, quarterly.
Right.
Because a lot of games get played June 30 to July 1.
Right.
And it gets sort of held over the budget process at the end of the year. You got to find the money. Everything has to be on the table. Everything has to be on the table. Again, a deal's a deal. And I think, as upset I am with Governor Christie and his support of Donald Trump and all of this horrific rhetoric that this presidential candidate has come up with, and Governor Christie's closeness to him has besmirched the reputation of our state. It's not just two guys. It's personal to the 9 million of us, because the country and the world look at our leader standing up with this guy, just as that hurts us, and it should hurt us, and it should cause us to stand up and criticize. Not standing up to your end of the bargain ruins your reputation as a partner, as somebody that you can trust. And the state has welched on its side of the deal. We have to get that behind us.
Right.
We have to be the state that people can do business with, that people can rely on. They can say, you know what, when the governor, and I hope it's me, says this is the deal, then they could say, you know what, that's the deal. We're going to move on to the next challenge. So we have to start there. I think there are several sources of money. I'll give you one source, and it's something I know a little bit about because I worked in financial services like yourself.
Right.
And that's the following. We have among the highest allocations of alternative investments of any public pension fund in the country. Hedge funds, largely hedge funds and private equity funds. I think it's 35%. We pay an enormous amount of fees to these managers.
Right.
I think I was in financial services, I started in I hate to say this, 34 years ago. I think maybe back then, if you were a hedge fund or a private equity shop, you were one of few. You charged a lot of money, but you generated a very worthwhile, impressive return. You got good value for money.
Right.
That's no longer the case. Not only is the world upside down, but the spaces are overwhelmed and crowded, and they're still charging the same amount of money.
Right. Yeah.
So I think we're throwing money out the window. A lot of big public pension funds have gone to low-cost, sophisticated indexing. CalPERS, the largest public pension fund in the country. Nevada, state pension. New York City has announced they're going to do this. And the money we're talking about is big money. It costs...
The savings and fees.
The savings and fees.
Okay.
It costs 30 times, not 30% more, 30 times the amount of money in fees to manage that 35% of alternative investments than it does to manage the 65% of plain vanilla investments. 30 times. Wow. There's a huge amount of money there. So if you could see a future which had a series of sophisticated indices, which are dirt cheap, and you have to accept the assumption, which you and I both know is a big one, that you could earn the similar return with similar risk, you could save an enormous amount of money. So that's something I've written about. I wrote about that before I even declared for governor. I had come to the conclusion that that's a huge source of savings, which if that money is put back into and not spent essentially in the pension plans, and you go to a quarterly system, you can see in our lifetime those pension plans getting close to the sort of 80% funded benchmark that the private sector would use as a reasonable test that these are plans in good condition. So that's a little bit of where that's one of many places you'd need to find money, but that's a big one.
Right. So do you support the constitutional amendment as it stands? So we're just going to put it on the ballot next year and we would vote on it and those payments would be made quarterly? Or do you want to tie savings to the constitutional amendment?
I don't see how we can go back, roll the clock back to 2005 when I chaired the commission. Somebody started calling our list of recommendations, everybody has to give a little bit of blood. Beginning, number one, state must own up. That was recommendation one. We used a very Orwellian phrase then. It was very popular. No more pension holidays. I'm not sure where that came from, but it made it sound much more. But you know what? That's fancy English for the state has to stop screwing the public sector employees by not owning up to its side of the bargain. But in 2005, I thought there was scope for let's all get around the table. If I do this, can you do that? 11 years later, I don't think you can even have the conversation of what others need to do unless the state stands up and makes that major move on the chessboard, that big down payment. I think of it buying a house. The state has to come up with that big down payment. And then let's see, once trust is instilled in the system, and there's no trust left with this governor. So sadly, this is going to be, I think, going to be kicked further down the road until January of 18. Let's get that established, the state's owning up to its part of the bargain, and then let's talk. But I think it's not even worth talking about it unless the state and a new governor says, you know what, we're going to make this right. We're going to make that first move that proves that you can rely on us.
Right.
Beyond that, I don't even think it's worth talking right now about anything.
Right. Well, and I think that, it's really a shame that we haven't been putting in the right amount of money because, to your point, I think that we have an obligation. We should be paying people what we tell them we're going to be giving them. The challenge is the revenue shortfall. So if you go back to why some of the payments weren't made, we didn't bring in enough in the state. And there's a bigger, if you look, it's $3 to $5 billion a year that has to go into pension payments in a $35 billion budget. So what's on the table that comes off in order to make those payments?
Let me tell you what. I'll come back to when you asked me a few minutes ago, what am I hearing and what do we talk about when we're with voters? Our budget has essentially been flat for 8 years. The economy is broken. This governor hasn't done a lick to grow this economy. We can't cut our way to salvation as a state. We have to grow the pie. We must grow the pie. That's job number one above all else. And I'd say if that's 1A, 1B is to make sure that everybody gets a piece of the pie. But that $35 billion has been within a couple $100 million of where it was in 2008. That can't be.
Why do you think that is?
Because we have not had any leadership, no economic vision. This is an economy which has been without leadership. I think of Governor Christie in two respects. One is largely, and I say this broadly, largely in social areas, actively leading to burnish his national right-wing Republican credentials. So that's women's health, it's the environment, it's lead paint, it's gun laws, all of which he's taken dramatically to the right, away from where the heartbeat of the state is. He's been an activist. His judicial appointments, activist governor, without question, caring about his constituency, and his constituency is one person, himself. On the economy, he's been away without leave. Literally has not apparently cared about it, does not have the interest, does not have the programs in place. When in doubt, the only thing he's come back to are tax incentives, which is, who wants to pay more taxes than they have to? I get it. People want to have a fair deal. Who doesn't? I understand that. The problem with only offering up tax incentives, first of all, you get into a race to the bottom with your neighbors, and that's exactly what's happened. So we cut it by X, and Pennsylvania cuts it by Y, or Connecticut, or Delaware, or wherever else we're competing with, New York.
Right.
Secondly, increasingly, companies are making decisions based on a whole range of factors, not just their tax rate. Again, let's stipulate people want a fair deal, good value for money in their taxes that they pay. I get that, individuals as well as companies. But I look no further than General Electric's decision earlier this year to move their global headquarters to Boston. Now, I grew up there. There's one reason I know they didn't go to Boston for. That's because it's cheaper to live in or to do business.
They didn't go for the warm weather.
They did not go for the weather, and they didn't go for the low taxes.
Right.
Boston and San Francisco might be the two places in this country that are more expensive to live in and do business than New Jersey, yet they are two centers that are attracting a lot of business, particularly in the STEM economy. So if you look at and you read, why did General Electric, after I think 2 years of kicking the tires on all sorts of places, I'm not sure they even gave us a look, by the way. I don't know that, but I've heard nothing that would rebut that. They chose Boston because the way I've put it is Boston's built, or Massachusetts has built, an economic ecosystem that when you take the entirety of all the elements of that ecosystem into account, it's a place you want to be. And there's no reason why we can't do the same thing in New Jersey. We look just like Eastern Massachusetts. There's no reason why we can't do that. So that's why did they move there? And you look at their CEO's comments, institutions of higher education, big emphasis on R&D at those institutions, communities that millennials want to live in, 21st century infrastructure, great public schools, walk to work, edgy sorts of things where people feel like, you know what, we've got confidence, this is a place I want to be. There's no reason we can't have a competitive vision, a competitive offering in New Jersey with the Bostons and San Franciscos of the world, but you need leadership. You need a governor who understands that, who prioritizes it, who cares about it. We haven't had it, I will.
Right. And in all fairness, the governor is not here to defend himself. But I do want to say that when I take the Northeast Corridor down the train to D.C., you see all these factories. They're all shut down. They're overgrown, and I find that it is a shame in New Jersey that we don't have a vibrant train cities along the train anymore.
Yep.
And we really need to, that's one of the biggest focuses, that we have great people, great institutions. We were, at one time, it was the Ma Bells or the telecom, it was then the medicine, pharma. And
we were Silicon Valley before there was a Silicon Valley.
Right. So what's going to make us the next Silicon Valley? I have an interview tomorrow that we're talking about what makes New Jersey the next Silicon Valley.
First of all, I would welcome the opportunity to sit right here with the governor. So if you would like him to come in and defend himself, I would welcome that opportunity. So hold that thought, Lisa. Just exactly the things that Massachusetts is doing so well, and that we ought to be doing just as well, and we're not doing. So it's getting back to investing in institutions of higher education. It's a big urban program, because millennials want to live in those communities that are closed in and tightly packed. Like the Hobokens of the world, they can't find enough space for people to live there. So as the big urban centers go, so goes our state in many respects. So getting Newark right, Patterson, Trenton, Camden, whatever else of the other urban centers right, huge potential for the entire state. Right. It's making sure our public schools work for everybody, not just for some. It's keeping kids going to college in the state and working in the state when they get out of college. Right. We lead the nation in exporting high school seniors and college seniors per capita. We got to find ways to keep them here and keep them, aspiring to, I could see my future in New Jersey.
What would be the first thing you would do to start attracting businesses? If it's not tax breaks, what would you do?
I've been asked, what's your first day look like? And I can leave out some things that are not directly related to this question, but I'd have three events on day one. Number one, I'd gather the presidents of all the institutions of higher education, because they are at the center of the successful. It's not a coincidence. What's happening in Boston is also adjacent to the Harvards, MITs, Boston Universities, Northeasterns of the world. In San Francisco, you could say the same thing about UCal, Berkeley, Stanford, other institutions. One is a meeting with the institutions of higher education, because they're going to have to be at the center of this. And again, it's the STEM economy that we're talking about here. And by rightful, that they have a rightful center stage place. Secondly, I'd have a meeting with our federal delegation, senators, both, and members of Congress. And explicitly, we'll be pulling out my list. This is where we need federal dollars. We used to be really good at this. Under Chris Christie, we've gotten really bad at it, which is to get as much federal money as possible, because as you rightfully point out, Lisa, the box in which we find our own state money is limited at the moment. We have to grow that box, but at the moment it's about $35 billion. We need as many federal dollars as possible, whether it's in building the successor tunnels or in infrastructure more generally. I'll give you an example. Hoboken has got the mayor there, Don Zimmer's got a very 21st century forward-looking flood water control system that she's a proponent of. It's borrowed from the Dutch, who know this really well. They've known it well for centuries. But she needs federal money and state money. That would be a boon. It would not only push back on a future Sandy devastation that city saw, but it would be a boon in the arena of the green economy, both doing good and doing well. So federal dollars, meeting with the federal delegation and be dogged about getting as much federal money as possible. Hillary Clinton's election of president has huge consequence if it were to come to pass for this state. Probably more for this state, frankly, than I think of any other state in the union. Her administration as a partner, working with our administration, working with Congress, has huge potential for us. And my third event of day one is to get in a plane and fly to Germany. Oh. And some other places that have big industrial centers where they are looking. You read the papers as I do every day. Europe is in turmoil. The economy, right-wing radicalism, energy crisis, migration, whatever it might be. Companies all around Europe, but I start in Germany because it's got the biggest industrial economy in Europe, they're looking to build their next whatever, their next headquarters, their next factory, their next sales office somewhere outside of Europe. Right. Most of them are looking at the United States. When I was ambassador, I entertained delegations from a lot of states who came over. You couldn't pick sides as an ambassador of one state versus the other, even though I was always rooting for New Jersey. You had to be a little bit careful because you're representing the country, not your state in that capacity. I entertained countless states led by governors typically. Do you know how many people from New Jersey showed up asking for the order? No one. So those are three quick things on day one. One, institutions of higher education. Two, meeting with the federal delegation. And three, being the salesman in chief for the state, because that's what the governor is. Sitting across from chief executives and say, listen, there is a whole range of reasons why you should pick New Jersey. Taxes is one of those. It's not the only one. It's a whole range of things.
Right. Now, I want to be respectful of your time because we've actually run over.
Oh, my word.
But I know it doesn't seem like it, does it? But I do want to ask this question because I think it's really important. When you talk about STEM, and that's the future for New Jersey, and that's what will make us grow, why are we looking for casinos to be a part of a revenue generation? Because to me, that's a far cry from something like a STEM.
The short answer, in the interest of time, is we need to look for revenue and job creation wherever we can find it. So while it may not be in the STEM economy per se, it's big revenue potential, particularly if we move quickly, and it appears as though we will not be moving quickly, against failed special interest politics. That's my phrase. I'm not even sure I understand what's going on behind the curtain, but I can tell you this, the result of which is that we will not get gaming as soon as we need to in the northern part of the state. It's a big revenue generator. There are a couple of models that have been specifically proposed. I've sat with the with the proponents of them, and I've kicked the tires on them. They're attractive to me at both of those levels. Big job creation, big revenue spinners, and by the way, probably the last potential reliable source of money to get back down into Atlantic City to re-envision that community. Not into the casinos, but into the community. And it needs a re-envisioning, and I think this is one of the ways we can get that done. So it's not in the STEM economy. I wouldn't say completely it's beggars can't be choosy, but we're kind of in that mode right now. We've got to find the revenue and jobs wherever we can find them, and this is one of them.
Yeah. Well, New York City, though, they could, if we decided to open up a casino right outside the city, they could turn around and open one as well. So
I'm assuming they will, whether we open it or not. Okay. I'd rather be ahead of them as opposed to behind. And by the way, as I've said in Atlantic City, if it opens on the west side of Manhattan, which is probably a logical place for it to open, they won't put 1 red cent into Atlantic City. Why not get out ahead of that? And whether it's 1 or 2 locations in the northern part of the state and have a deal, which both of these proponents, both of the gentlemen behind these plans, has said they would agree to a deal that would get funnel money back down to Atlantic City.
One last question,
Please.
because I want to get you while you're still here. We didn't get to talk about you being the U.S. ambassador to Germany, and I'd love to talk
Good
more
reason
about
to come back, right?
Exactly. But one thing that we're both passionate about is the middle class.
Yep.
And you started a nonprofit because you wanted to help boost the middle class. I want you just to briefly talk about it, what work has been done, some of the wins that the nonprofit has had. And part of that question is I also want to talk about who are the middle class in New Jersey, because we have a wide range, whether it's from the lower to the upper.
Right.
So is it servicing that entire population or only a certain population within the middle class?
It's the entire population, but it's also the folks who are not in the middle class who aspire to be. And maybe that's even more important. We launched this nonprofit a couple years ago called New Start New Jersey. When I announced my candidacy for governor, I got off of the board there. So my wife Tammy is the chair of the board. It's still doing great work. And it is directed, as you rightfully point out, Lisa, at the middle class to strengthen it and grow it. And that with big implications for the folks who are looking up to get into the middle class. We did a poll when we launched it, and we didn't put in dollars and cents as to definitions. We just said self-identify yourself. What class do you think you're in this state? And I forget how many choices you got. 76% of the people we asked said middle class. So New Jersey is the quintessential middle class state. But the problem is, of course, it's been hollowed out. And that's a phrase that people use a lot, but the evidence is overwhelming. And we saw that right before we launched it and once we launched New Start New Jersey. Folks, I'll give you one example. We asked folks, what are the central pillars of an ideal middle class, and where are you relative to those pillars? And they came up with a bunch of things you would expect. Afford things for my family. I can afford my retirement, basic things. Then we said, where are you? Shocking gap between where they are in their own lives versus where they thought they would be or ideally should be. Not even on the list. Not even on the list of what are the central pillars of a middle class is a college education for my kids. It's not even on the list for the overwhelming amount of folks in the state, which is a crushing result. So New Start New Jersey has done a lot of good work, nonpartisan, nonprofit, not retail. So this is a think tank, as it were, terrific board of advisors run by a terrific individual, and does really good work looking at a whole range of middle class fixes, a lot of it on job creation, wages. What are the things that can strengthen the middle class? College affordability. A lot of the good ideas that we've talked about on our fairness agenda as a candidate for governor, we researched and really kicked the tires on in New Start New Jersey. It is out there doing great work and will continue to be out there.
Excellent. We have to end it there.
Great being here.
I would love to have you back, though.
I would love to come back,
All
with
right.
or without the governor.
Maybe the governor will come on. I don't know.
Amen. You never
All
know.
right. Thank you so much,
Lisa,
Phil.
really
All right.
appreciate your having me.
All right. So I'd like to thank my special guest, Democrat gubernatorial candidate Phil Murphy, very much for your time.
Thank you.
And I'd like to thank the audience for watching this special episode of As a Matter of Fact. I'm Lisa Allen, and I look forward to seeing you next month. Check us out on Hometown on Facebook at Hometown TV and www.hometowntv.org. Thank you.